You know, on his very first day in office this year, Donald Trump attempted to unilaterally rewrite one of the core features of the American Constitution, one that was put into that document after the bloody horror of slavery and the Civil War. And today, the question of whether he has the ability to do that and what the courts are going to do about it landed before the Supreme Court. There are hundreds of protesters gathered outside as the justices listened to oral arguments about whether birthright citizenship, the law of the land for 157 years, could be undone by Trump's authoritarian whims. Now, the first line of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution reads, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside." It was written very precisely and consciously by a group of lawmakers as the first of their Reconstruction-era constitutional reforms after banning slavery, an effort to refound the nation on the principles of true multiracial democracy. Today, Trump and his lawyers took a stab at undoing that. Some justices were not having it.
You're losing a bunch of cases, this guy over here, this woman over here, they'll have to be treated as citizens, but nobody else will. Why would you ever take this case to us? In a case in which the government is losing constantly, there's nobody else who's going to appeal, they're winning, it's up to you to decide whether to take this case to us. If I were in your shoes, there is no way I'd approach the Supreme Court with this case. This is not a hypothetical. This is happening out there, right? Every court has ruled against you.
She's not wrong. Justice Elena Kagan was referring to Trump's Inauguration Day executive order, which essentially seeks to deny citizenship to anyone born in the U.S. to parents who aren't already citizens or permanent residents. Now, enforcement of that order has been halted by the federal courts in at least 4 separate lawsuits against the Trump administration because it's so blatantly unconstitutional, anti-constitutional even. And so they appealed to the Supreme Court, and it's easy to see why, right? Here's the math. Trump thinks the justices are made men and made women, that they're his people, at least the 3 he personally appointed, the 3 other conservatives he inherited. And I think his takeaway from another Supreme Court case last year, the one that granted him broad immunity for crimes he committed in official acts as president, was that if you have a solid majority of justices in the high court, you can amend the Constitution. You can add a new immunity provision or just delete birthright citizenship simply by going to the court and basically rewriting the document. It's that easy. Get 5 votes, and the U.S. Constitution can say whatever you want it to say. But today in oral arguments, Trump's lawyers did not ask the justices to rule on the merits of their bizarre fringe order ending birthright citizenship. Instead, what they were arguing today that none of the federal judges, these are the lowest level judges, district court judges, who halted the order had the power to issue nationwide injunctions. They said the judge's relief should only apply to the plaintiffs, the individual parties who sued the administration. And some of the justices, including one of the conservatives, Amy Coney Barrett, seem to say, whoa, not so fast. That makes no sense.
Look, there are all kinds of abuses of nationwide injunctions. But I think that the question that this case presents is that if one thinks that it's quite clear that the EO is illegal, how does one get to that result, in what time frame, on your set of rules without the possibility of a nationwide injunction?
On this case and on many similar cases, the appropriate way to do it is for there to be multiple lower courts considering it, the appropriate percolation that goes to the lower courts, and then ultimately this court decides the merits in a nationwide binding precedent. You have a complete inversion of that through the nationwide injunctions where the district
So, General
courts...
Sauer, are you really going to answer Justice Kagan by saying there's no way to do this expeditiously?
Notice the Trump lawyers, they like when things percolate. Yeah, they like when things take a little while when they're not in a hurry. When they're in a hurry, they want it to go fast. Now, suddenly, the Trump White House was compounding one gross abuse of power, ending birthright citizenship, with another one, arguing that even if a federal court rules their executive order unconstitutional, the administration can keep carrying it out against anyone who wasn't expressly named as a plaintiff in that ruling, which is a dodge. And they're only saying that because they keep getting shredded by lower courts. So today it fell to the court's liberals to call out just how unequal and unjust that dodge was.
Your argument seems to turn our justice system, in my view at least, into a catch-me-if-you-can kind of regime from the standpoint of the executive, where everybody has to have a lawyer and file a lawsuit in order for the government to stop violating people's rights. Justice Kagan says, let's assume for the purpose of this that you're wrong about the merits, that the government is not allowed to do this under the Constitution, and yet it seems to me that your argument says we get to keep on doing it until everyone who is potentially harmed by it figures out how to file a lawsuit, hire a lawyer, et cetera. And I don't understand how that is remotely consistent with the rule of law.
It's not remotely consistent with the rule of law, in my humble opinion. It's a rule bought by blood in the Civil War and enshrined by the framers of the 14th Amendment. They knew fully what they were doing. They debated it. Their core vision was equality under the law, no matter people's races or ethnic origin, even if they had been born to parents brought here in slave bondage or to parents who came from foreign land of their own volition. So that everyone born here was equal to everyone else born here, full stop. That part of the 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment in its fullness, is a cherished part of the American experiment. Congress has even incorporated its language into U.S. code to put birthright citizenship beyond any doubt. Now, plenty of other countries don't have such guarantees. Countries that have produced entire caste systems and multiple generations of second-class citizens. And it is not too much to say that birthright citizenship is one of the pillars of the American dream. And of course, Donald Trump is not just trying to detonate it. He's trying to do it in a way that will give him even more latitude to ignore courts that rule against him. What we don't know just yet is whether the Supreme Court's conservative majority will have his back. Jamal Green is professor of constitutional law at Columbia. He's a deputy assistant attorney general in the Biden DOJ. Maya Wiley is president of the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights. She served in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, and they both join me now. It's good to have you here. Let me just first start. I'll start with you, Jamal, and then go to you, Maya, in terms of what your broad takeaways from the arguments this morning were.
Well, I think the really important point here is what you led with, which is he's going to lose on the merits. He's already lost several times. He's very, very likely to lose at the Supreme Court. And what he's really trying to do here is kind of get another bite at the apple to try to get himself a win. His lawyers are setting up a case over an issue that some of the justices have been concerned about in the past, which is a single district court issuing a nationwide injunction. But this is the absolute wrong case for that. And that's what you kind of saw getting teased out by a lot of the justices today.
Did you feel the same way that the losing on the merits hung over the arguments?
Well, I felt both those things, right? That the losing of the merits, this is a case where Trump-appointed judges in lower courts ruled against them. You had it in your setup, Chris. The Constitution's pretty plain and clear, and the history is clear. And as Justice Sotomayor said, she started counting the Supreme Court precedents over 100 years that they'd have to overlook and bypass to hold it up. But the nationwide injunction is not a small thing.
Right.
I mean, what Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was saying was absolutely right. So what you're trying to do is abuse your power, but weaken the court's ability to be that check and balance that says, this is going to harm way too many people for us to just apply it to the plaintiffs. And that's the part to understand. If there are 28 states where there are not lawsuits, babies are still getting born.
Yeah, I mean,
who aren't
every
going
day
to get Social Security numbers?
People are giving birth to children here who are on student visas, on work visas, don't have papers. I mean, there's a million different ways you could be here,
or
born in the United States.
Born here.
Right.
And I think you said it absolutely right. There was a clear constitutional decision to say, born here, you're one of us.
Yes.
And what they're really saying, and we're not going to talk about South Africans right now, but Donald Trump in the 1990s who said, we're not going to be South Africa. This is all about race. So at a time when we're talking about the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, we should remember it was to create a more perfect union that was diverse, not to be afraid of that diversity and start denying rights across the board to not perfect it.
Your point about so there's the merits, which I think we all agree, like it's ludicrous. And let's just say they're going to lose for the argument here, okay? Now, the procedural stuff can get weedsy, but it seems to me there's two ways to really understand it. I'll start with what you're saying, which is that the burden on the people impacted here is insane. Like, you're talking about thousands of people, and then there are more and more and more, and every single one, literally, in the hospital, you're taking home your baby, like, do they get a birth certificate? Do they get a social security? I mean, all of that hung up while the court decides it, that's a crazy burden to put on people.
I think it even goes further than that, because any baby that's born in the United States, under the law as it's been for more than 100 years, all you need is your birth certificate.
Right.
But now it's everyone. It's not just people who.
That's a great point. Now you now have to introduce a kind of sorting hat, right?
Exactly.
To the delivery room that has never existed before.
At a time when this is the same administration trying to say, you better have a birth certificate,
yes.
You better have a passport, that we will deny you if you want to vote.
Right.
I mean, that is the complete confluence of the way in which they're trying to control us, we the people, rather than letting we the people be the people.
If you forget projections, numbers, what's your hunch? Is the U.S. going to go into recession or not?
Look, I'm going to defer to economists who give it about a 50% chance. I think all these things are probably inflationary a little bit more and slowing down the economy. If there's a recession, I don't know how big it'll be or how long it'll last. Hopefully we'll avoid it, but I wouldn't take it off the table at this point.
Not taking it off the table. Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. No need to get your ears checked. You heard that right. A recession is very much on the table, according to J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon. Of course, it's one thing to predict economic pain, but to see it start to happen to real people, that's another thing entirely, and the part of the story we've been watching for closely. Today, a toxic tangle of tariffs, volatility, and supply chain issues, among other things, is making this self-inflicted economic crisis exponentially more real and tangible for Americans from coast to coast, up and down the economic spectrum. We've spoken at length about what will happen to small business owners and smaller retailers in the days and weeks to come. But what about the big ones, like the biggest? Walmart is as big as they come, as in our nation's largest private sector employer and the world's largest retailer. Put 10 Americans in a room and 9 of them would live within 10 miles of a Walmart. Well, this afternoon, it appears that Goliath, Walmart, will begin the process of raising costs of goods on consumers, even after this week's new China trade deal. During the company's quarterly earnings call, CEO Doug McMillon suggested this, quote, given the magnitude of the tariffs, even at the reduced levels announced this week, we are not able to absorb all the pressure, given the reality of narrow retail margins. Shortly after that, Walmart's CFO, John David Rainey, emphasized that earnings are still strong, but then he added this.
Our goal, though, we're wired to keep prices low for customers. But the level of tariffs that have been proposed is pretty challenging for all retailers, for suppliers, and certainly our concern is that consumers are going to feel some of that. So we're going to keep prices as low as we can for as long as we can for our customers and members.
Those tariff-related price hikes, according to him, to Rainey, could start toward the end of this month. It is a game-changing economic and political development, according to Neil Saunders, managing director at retail consultancy Global Data. Quote, if Walmart's coming out with its scale and its buying power and its focus and saying that prices are going to rise, everyone else is going to have to follow suit. Walmart is firing the starting gun on a period of price increases. And so we'll return to where we began, that a recession in this country is, quote, not off the table, end quote. It's where we start the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Leisman is back. Also joining our conversation, David Frum, staff writer for The Atlantic, host of the new video podcast, The David Frum Show. And with me at the table for the hour, former Democratic Senator, MSNBC political analyst, our friend Claire McCaskill. Steve, I start with you.
Well, I think the way to think about it, Nicole, is that if you think about a hurricane approaching, all right, well, the hurricane's a bit smaller than it was before, and that metaphor kind of gets to the idea that the tariffs on China are lower, but it's still a hurricane. And so what we're seeing right now are kind of those first clouds that come across. And we saw those clouds in a bunch of places. The Walmart thing you mentioned is out there. Recession chances and probabilities for many of the economists I'm talking to are lower, but still considerably elevated. Think about 15% probability being about a normal distribution for the chance of a recession in any given year. Well, now they're still in the 40 to 50% range. They're not in 60%, but they're still relatively elevated. We saw a very interesting development in the wholesale price report, not to get too in the weeds, but it looks like the first inclination of the people importing products into the United States was to take it on the chin in profits. And then if you read between the lines of what the gentleman from Walmart was saying, he's saying, okay, we absorbed some of the prices, but we can't do all of it, and we won't do all of it. So these price hikes are coming, as in the rest of the hurricane is going to come this way, at least to some extent. Does it mean empty shelves? Maybe not right away, but over time, we are certainly going to see the effects of these tariffs. You cannot increase tariffs this much. That is, still at these lower levels. They're 5 times what they were before. You cannot do something like that and it have no effect on the consumer and on the retailers who are selling the stuff.
Steve, I like the hurricanes. I feel like we are in the eye right now, where the live shots are always eerily quiet, but there are things swirling all around. I want to ask you, though, about a 30% tariff, because I know in our politics and when you cover the rule of law, when it's Trump, because he's such a Tyrannosaurus Rex in a china shop, there's a law of relativity through which he gets evaluated and examined. And I feel like this is happening in your area of expertise, that because the tariff started with China at 145%, everyone's like, well, 30's a lot better than it used to be. But 30 is devastating for consumers. It's, as you've explained, it's a regressive tax on all consumer goods that come from China. 30% is also devastating on a small and medium-sized business owner, and the trade implications in terms of supply chain equally devastating. So take out where we started at 145 and just give me your analysis of what 30% tariffs on China means.
Well, you know, you said it very well, because there's this bit of a dichotomy going on in the stock market right now, which has come back on this relief that you're talking about. Hey, it's not 145%. We are not inevitably careening towards that recession. There's still perhaps some chance, again, that the storm perhaps passes us by, or only we get a glancing blow. But when economists and people at the Federal Reserve look at it, they're like, hey, this is still a 5-time increase in the tariff rate. So what does it mean? You think about somebody like Walmart. They have thousands of products to which to spread out the cost. And you may not see it all in one particular product. They may take a little bit of less profit in this product, or a little bit more in that product. A smaller retailer, they can't do it. They don't pick up the phone and they don't call the White House and say, Mr. President, we have a problem here. No, they take it on the chin. We're already hearing stories of layoffs. The economy underlying it looks pretty good. The jobless claims numbers are in pretty good shape right now. That's why I say it's still coming our way. Is there still a chance to avoid it? It's an interesting question, because on the one hand, the president provided some relief over the 90-day period. At the same time, he did to some businesses, more deadly thing of extending the period of uncertainty for 90 days. So this creates this problem where people are still standing still. We still hear CEOs saying, look, if you think about it, what is a retailer doing right now? A good retailer is desperately seeking for those perfect and beautiful and fabulous gifts that you're going to buy at Christmas. What are they instead doing right now? They're trying desperately to secure their existing supply chains for stuff they already have. So it's an incredible distraction for the individual retailer, and it's going to mean probably something that people will see come holiday season.
David Frum, you write about the 4 scams. Explain.
Well, the scams are the fake deal with China, which is no deal, the fake deal with Britain, which is no deal. But I want to pound home a point here as people watch this, because why is the stock market up? The stock market is up because Wall Street has figured out Trump's tariffs, although bad for many people, are not going to be bad for them. Who are they bad for? And this is where we have to understand what a tariff is. A tariff is a tax, but it's a special kind of tax, and it's special in 3 ways. First, it's a tax that can be imposed by the president at his whim All other taxes imposed by Congress to represent the people. Tariffs can be imposed by the president at his whim. It's a tax that can be exempted by the president at his whim. He can sell special favors. If you want to break in the corporate income tax, you have to get Congress to pass it. But if you want to break in the tariff, just ask the president, buy his meme coin, give him a check. He'll make a special favor for you. And last, it's a tariff that falls uniquely hardest on the poorest section of society. A tariff is a sales tax, but a sales tax that only falls on goods, not on services. It falls on the doll, not on the nanny that is hired to play with the doll. It falls on the towel, not on the swimming club. It falls on the doorknob, not on the doorman who operates the door. It falls on the poorest people in society. A 10 to 30% tariff isn't going to cause shortages, and it may not push the whole economy into recession. What it does do is it raises prices for working people, and it takes the burden of government and it moves it from people who are better positioned to pay onto the people least in position to pay. So you have to combine this tariff story with what the Republicans are doing in the House, where there's going to be giant tax cuts for everybody, financed in great part by these tariffs on low-income people. Last image. Think of a rich family and a poor family at dinner. The poor family, the table is tariffed. The chair is tariffed. The plate is tariffed. The knives and forks are tariffed. If they're eating pasta, the pasta comes from Canada. It's tariffed. Now the rich family, they go out to dinner. The most important to celebrate their new tax cut from Donald Trump. The most important cost at a restaurant is the rent, not tariffed. The second most important cost, the wage of the chef, the wage of the server, not tariffed. And the plates, they're tariffed, but they come from Italy, so they have a lower tariff than the plates that come from China. This is the most aggressive attempt to shift the cost of government from the rich to the poor that America has seen in the past century, maybe longer.
David Frum, what is the appropriate political response?
The appropriate political response is to discover the cause of free trade. There's been a lot of mealy-mouthedness from Democrats on this. Democrats have liked tariffs. Donald Trump, the most protectionist president since World War II. Joe Biden, second most protectionist president. A lot of Democrats say, I'm against these tariffs because they're dumb, but I'm for smart tariffs. The answer is to rediscover. Tariffs are a tax that falls heaviest on the poorest people. They're a tax that is the most dangerous tax because it's the most arbitrary tax. Tariffs are wrong. Free trade is right. And raise money, if you're going to raise money with a consumption tax, raise it on one that middle-class people pay by taxing services as well as goods, a VAT or a carbon tax. But don't make the people who are eating spaghetti on cheap chairs, on cheap tables, with cheap plates, with cheap knives, don't make them pay the cost of government all by themselves.
President Trump is truly the most transparent and accessible president in American history.
And President Trump is the most transparent president ever.
This has been the most transparent administration in history, probably in world history.
I mean, I don't know what the difference between history and world history, what even the context of world history is supposed to be there, but you get the idea. Trump officials love to talk about how Trump is the most transparent president in history. I don't have to tell you that claim is bizarre a little bit. It's also kind of hilarious, given how wrong it is. Now, here's the headline today from the HuffPost. Most transparent White House in history keeps majority of Trump's remarks secret. HuffPost reports that since Trump took office, the White House has published just 29 transcripts of the 146 public remarks Trump made in his first 100 days. Now, for all of you math nerds out there, that's less than 20% of the remarks he's made have been published. The White House hasn't actually published a Trump transcript in over 2 months. So why is the most transparent administration in history trying to hide what the most transparent president in history, apparently, or the world, says from the public? Why are they trying to hide it? Well, maybe it's because he keeps saying things like this.
The drone is killing tremendous numbers of people. You hide behind a tree and the drone comes down and it circles you with fire. You don't have a chance. The tree comes down also, by the way. It's so intense. I mean, you see these trees being knocked down like they're being sawed down by a top-of-the-line timberman like, you know, who? Sean Duffy. Do you know that Sean Duffy, the head of the Transportation Department, who's working right now on the airports and getting a system because Biden didn't do a thing for 4 years, and Pete Buttigieg was the head, and he goes bicycling to work.
To be in the mind of the two people sitting next to Trump during those remarks, what were they thinking? So that was Donald Trump today. He was, of course, representing the United States of America on an official state visit to Qatar. To be clear, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy was not at this event, had absolutely nothing to do with it. This is a roundtable with military contractors. And since we don't have an official transcript of those remarks from the White House, let me just read you some of that back to you. Here it is, quote, "You hide behind a tree and the drone comes down and it circles you with fire. You don't have a chance. The tree comes down also, by the way. It's so intense. I mean, you see these trees being knocked down like they're being sawed down by a top-of-the-line timberman. Like you know who? Sean Duffy, the head of the Transportation Department, who's working right now on the airports and getting a system because Biden didn't do a thing for 4 years and Pete Buttigieg was the head and he goes bicycle into work." Okay. If you think I'm cherry picking the weirdest thing Trump said today or I'm leaving out words, trust you, I'm not. We played it for you. I read it for you. He also repeated his weird line about how the word groceries is an old-fashioned term nobody uses anymore. And he inexplicably claimed Hitler gave a speech at the Eiffel Tower, which of course never happened. Again, all of that was just today, which is to say nothing about all the strange things he said since taking office again.
And instead of using hydraulic, like on tractors that can handle anything from hurricanes to lightning to anything, they used magnets. It's a new theory. Magnets are going to lift the planes up, and it doesn't work. So we've opened up the shower heads, the faucets, the toilets. Seriously overweight, and he takes the fat shot drug. This is a different panel than I've had. Everything's computer. I hear so much about the word groceries. I used to use groceries a lot on the trail. A word that's like sort of an old-fashioned word, groceries. But groceries is the word that's the most accurate word. Basically, what we're doing is equalizing. There's a new word that I came up with, which I think is probably the best word. It sort of represents something that's both horrible and beautiful and strong and miserable, weak.
Okay. See, all of that goes a long way toward explaining why the Trump White House might not want an official record of all the things he said posted on the White House website and blasted out to reporters every time he's speaking. But here's the thing. These transcripts are not just some perfunctory thing that White Houses put out when they feel like. I mean, for decades, presidents of both parties have had their public statements recorded and transcribed by nonpartisan civil servants who serve as stenographers. They literally travel with presidents everywhere they go. And the transcripts are then sent out to the full White House press list, typically within hours, and also posted on the White House website. It's an important part of what it means for an administration to be transparent, to make sure the press and the American public have an official record of remarks from the leader of the free world. Now, when HuffPost asked the White House a pretty simple question about why they were publishing these transcripts so infrequently, they got this response from the ever-charming White House communications director, Stephen Chung. Here's what he said, quote, or here's part of what he said. "You must be truly effing stupid if you think we're not transparent. Stop be clowning yourself." I think Stephen Chung may need some fresh air. Maybe he goes and bicycle into work, as his boss might suggest.
Joining us now, as promised, the ranking member on House Intelligence, Congressman Jim Himes. I want to start where Mark just left off, which is that Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, and you know this from confirmation hearings or from just having to have oversight over her and having conversations about her assessment of intelligence over the years. He's saying that she sees things differently than most intelligence offices, the community. If she's in control of the presidential daily brief, what do you have concerns? And if you do, what are those concerns?
Yeah, well, those concerns are kind of encapsulated in this whole story, right? And let me back up away from all of the kind of oily-looking stuff associated with the firing of two professionals who produced a report which was at odds with what the president, what Tulsi Gabbard were saying. You just put up a tweet, I think it was a tweet, that had this statement that this is yet another example of people inside the intelligence community who are not consistent, I can't remember the wording, with the policies of the president. That makes absolutely no sense. And it's really important that people understand that the intelligence community is not a policy body. It's not like the State Department, which may say, hey, you ought to negotiate a deal with Russia or not. The intelligence community is not a policy body. They have one job and one job only, and that is to provide the very best intelligence conclusions and analysis to policy makers, to the president and to others, right? So the idea that somebody inside this organization whose sole purpose is to provide information is at odds with the policy of the president just makes absolutely no sense. And what worries me here, to answer your question very specifically, first of all, it's not clear to me how much the president actually either looks at or is moved by the president's daily brief. But if the DNI is intercepting the conclusions of this $90 billion operation we have to try to provide the best information to the president and putting a slant on it the way she did with the Venezuela Tren de Aragua thing, this country becomes a lot less safe than it should be.
Is this going to affect the intelligence that you get as a member of the Gang of Eight?
Well, it could, right? I mean, this is the other big worry. The other big worry is two individuals, lifelong intelligence professionals were fired. Now, I've asked the DNI for the reason for that. And I would note that ordinarily when people of that seniority are fired, my committee should be informed. We learned about this on Fox News. Okay, no reason has been given other than this vague accusation of, weaponizing or politicizing. Imagine what every other senior person in the intelligence community is thinking if it doesn't turn out that these two individuals were fired for a good reason. The message comes through loud and clear, which is that if you produce information that is at odds with the things that the president says or believes, you will lose your job. And these are enormously good people, but they're people, right? And so at worst, this looks like it could be an attempt to really shape the information that gets to the president. And that's a very, very dangerous world.
I'm going to go broad. I wonder if you think we're safe right now. And I ask that because we've seen some really galling or worrisome security breaches or lapses with this administration. You have Hegseth, the defense secretary, sharing war or attack plans over signal. I mean, that we know of. There could be other things that we don't know of. You have the president of the United States who seems pretty happy and content to accept a plane from a foreign nation. No strings attached, he says. I think that's questionable. You have this director of national intelligence taking over the presidential daily brief as you're talking about allegations that two people who didn't align with the president's policies were fired. And now this looming threat that if you don't get in line on the political agenda with this administration and tailor your information to that agenda, then you're going to be fired. Are we in a situation where we're at risk of missing something serious that might put, individual lives in danger here in the country?
I mean, the answer to that question is yes, right? I mean, let me put you into two pairs of shoes. Imagine the analyst right now at CIA. Maybe that analyst is an African-American woman, right? And she sees the war on DEI. And she says, now in the hallways, do people look at me and say, I'm a DEI hire, I'm an affirmative action hire? She may have the confidence to say, no, I'm not. But she's thinking about that rather than thinking about, the terrorist groups that it is her job to cover, or the missiles in North Korea that she's supposed to watch. General Tim Hawk, superb commander of Cyber Command and director of the NSA, apparently fired because Laura Loomer, and again, we don't have good reasons yet for that firing, which was weeks ago, apparently fired because Laura Loomer didn't like it. Again, imagine what these people who have dedicated their lives to keeping us safe are thinking if their job is at risk because Laura Loomer walks into the Oval Office and says, I don't like that guy. So there's that category of people. Then imagine that you're a terrorist. Imagine that you're a terrorist and you say to yourself, wow, Pete Hegseth, who put operational plans for an attack on Yemen onto an unsecure signal chat, is at the Pentagon. You've got these ongoing scandals at the DNI about firing people who provide information. Do I think this is a worse time or a better time to try to conduct an attack on the United States? My guess is when they look at this chaos and they look at this politicization, the answer is this is a better time than we have seen for a while to undertake an attack.
Is this concern shared by your colleagues, your Republican colleagues?
So, I mean, sadly, my Republican colleagues here remain a wholly owned subsidiary of Donald J. Trump, right? So they're not interested in the tough questions at all. Because it puts their head above the parapet. And again, remember what happens to people who espouse views separate from the president's. They get fired. In this case, they would get primaried. And so, no, half the Congress, the majority, the narrow majority in both the House and the Senate, have no interest in really getting involved in any of this stuff, including crazy things like a 747 being donated for the president to fly around in moments of crisis. I think this will change, but right now, the Republicans in the House and the Senate are wholly owned subsidiaries of Donald J. Trump.
You know, everyone's talked initially about the ethics of the plane. They're still talking about the ethics of the plane. Fine. I think somebody said this correctly. You knew he was a snake you knew I was a snake when you let me in, calling back to Donald Trump reading the snake at his rallies. I think what interests me more and what concerns me more and has concerned me more is just the security issue with this plane. The idea that we're going to take a plane from anybody, friend, foe, and just fly the president around in it. Seems a bit crazy. All right, Congressman Jim Himes, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Katie.
Capitol Hill, 3 GOP-led House committees have advanced legislation that's set to be combined into President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, tackling his legislative agenda. Despite infighting among party members, Republicans are moving forward with cuts to taxes, Medicaid, and food assistance after several marathon markup sessions. President Trump weighed in last night on Fox News and suggested the final bill could get Democratic support.
I think a lot of Democrats are going to be forced to vote for the bill because, you add this new element that if this bill passes, you're going to get a 50 to 90% reduction in prescription drugs and pharmaceuticals. When you add that in, how does a Democrat not vote? I don't think they can win an election if they don't vote for it. But even if you don't include it, I think that the Republicans are very unified and something would happen where they will get this vote.
Meanwhile, Republican Senator Josh Hawley is warning his own party over its push to make potential cuts to Medicaid. In a guest essay for the New York Times, Hawley wrote in part this: Mr. Trump has promised working class tax cuts and protection for working class social insurance, such as Medicaid. But now a noisy contingent of corporatist Republicans, call it the party's Wall Street wing, is urging Congress to ignore all that and get back to the old-time religion, corporate giveaways, preferences for capital, and deep cuts to social insurance. The wing of the party wants Republicans to build our big, beautiful bill around slashing health insurance for the working poor. But that argument is both morally wrong and politically suicidal. Hawley has continued to speak about the potential cuts yesterday during an appearance on CNN.
It ought to be just a basic foundational principle. It is wrong to cut health care for the working poor. That's what we're talking about here with Medicaid. My state is a Medicaid expansion state. Over 20% of Missourians, including hundreds of thousands of children, are on Medicaid. And Mono, they're not on Medicaid because they want to be. They're on Medicaid because they cannot afford health insurance in the private market. These are working people and their children who need health care. And it's just wrong to go and cut their health care when they're trying to make ends meet, trying to help their kids, trying to make sure that they're able to provide for their families. So I hope that the House GOP and the Senate GOP will get the message here. I'm not going to support this bill from the House in this form. I think that's clear. It's got to change before it can pass the Senate. And I continue to stand by my line in the sand, which is no Medicaid benefit cuts. This is real Medicaid benefit cuts. I can't support that. No Republican should support that. We're the party of the working class, Manu. We need to act like it.
Well, this is something that we've been, that's something we've been talking about on the show for quite some time, that actually disproportionately Medicaid cuts, even though Republicans in the House obviously don't understand this, Medicaid cuts disproportionately impact Americans in rural communities, disproportionately impact red states like Josh Hawley. You look at in rural America, some estimates up to 50% of children get their primary health care from Medicaid providers. When you look at where people are sending their parents and grandparents to being taken care of in nursing homes, an overwhelming majority of those in rural communities, again, that's funded by Medicaid. You keep, there's already, we've had a guest on the show talking about this, there's already been a crisis in rural health care in America over the past 10, 15 years. This would so exacerbate it. You wonder seriously how Republicans couldn't listen, can't believe I'm saying this, to Josh Hawley, couldn't listen to Josh Hawley and understand they want to slash health care benefits for their constituents in red state America to pay for tax cuts for billionaires living in Silicon Valley, Palm Beach, and Manhattan. Like,
terrible.
Well, it's terrible, and it's also politically stupid. Like, if you don't want to do it because it's the right thing to do it for your own political,
Be
preservation.
pragmatic. Yeah.
That makes sense. Let's bring in right now opinion writer for the New York Times, Frank Bruni. His recent New York Times best-selling book, The Age of Grievance, is now out in paperback. Now also with his co-anchor of CNBC's Squawk Box and a New York Times columnist, Andrew Ross Sorkin. Frank, I want to start with you. We heard Josh Hawley actually saying something that should be very obvious to most Republicans, especially Republicans in deep red state America, whether you're in Missouri, whether you're in Alabama, whether you're in Nebraska, wherever you are, Idaho, like Medicaid, Montana, Medicaid is a lifeline for those residents. And here you have Republicans talking about slashing Medicaid to pay for, billionaires' tax cuts on the coasts.
Which is why that big, beautiful bill has some big, unbeautiful problems, right? I mean, there's long been this myth in the Republican Party that anything that smacks of the welfare state is only for voters of color in Democratic cities. And as we know from as far back as that seminal book, What's the Matter with Kansas, a lot of these programs, a lot of government assistance goes to rural areas, goes to red states. And that's a big problem in terms of passing this bill. I listened to that clip you just played of President Trump saying he can't imagine any Republican being against it. I guess he can't hear Josh Hawley's voice or read the op-ed page of the New York Times, but there is disagreement in the Republican Party. There's disagreement in the MAGA caucus. I mean, I write about this in a column that'll go up in a couple of hours, but Laura Loomer has come out against the Medicaid cuts. And there's an interesting larger story here, which is we always talk of MAGA, or many of us talk too frequently of the MAGA movement as a cult. And it's actually quite fractious. And I think we're seeing that through the lens of this one big, beautiful bill. It sounds like a seventh grader named it.
It is so fractious. And you have, of course, Andrew, I'll throw this to you. You can talk about this coalition or go wherever you want to go, because you are Andrew Ross Sorkin and you remain as a media figure too big to fail. But we've seen this fight time and time again over the last 3 months, the sort of divide in MAGA world. Steve Bannon's populist wing, which Josh Hawley very clearly said there, who, again, Steve Bannon saying positive things about AOC, saying positive things about Bernie Sanders, and actually fighting against these tax cuts, saying they are absolutely terrible for the MAGA movement. Then on the other side, you have Elon Musk, you have Mark Andreessen, you have a lot of people on Wall Street who want those tax cuts. And so you're seeing this divide, again, whether it's tax cuts, whether it's tariffs, whether it's visas for high wage workers. Talk about that and look, what you see from your vantage point.
I think what you're seeing here is the old school, and I don't know if it's old school, fiscal conservatives who say, look, there's math here, and we want to somehow cut the budget. We want to cut taxes, all of those things. And if you're going to do those things and you're going to try to balance the budget, if in fact that is even a goal anymore, one of the things you might have to touch is Medicaid. So that's the sort of old school fiscal conservative class that's inside the White House and inside parts of Washington these days on the Republican side. But as I think you're alluding to, there is this sort of new populist movement inside of MAGA, which is almost, by the way, has in some cases a Bernie Sanders feel to it, depending on what the issue of the day is. And so, there's folks who are going to say, we got to keep Medicaid going, we got to keep spending, and we got to lower taxes. It's a very interesting thing to do because, in a way, it also takes away some of the argument, frankly, from Democrats. So, up until a week or two ago, it felt like there was actually a possibility that there would be higher taxes on the wealthy in America coming from MAGA. I mean, that there are people inside the White House talking about that. That now seems to be off the table. I think partially because that's off the table, there's now a view, how are you going to pay for everything? Well, how do you pay for things? Maybe you're going to have to take something off something else. And that's why I think there's this now new attack on Medicaid. But that's sort of the war going on inside the White House as we speak.